Can you imagine waking up and seeing your fence destroyed because Karen from the HOA decided she wanted to open up a community path? That's right. It was a quiet morning, you know? The kind of day when you wake up happy because you finally got your yard tidied up after months of procrastination. The wooden fence was freshly painted. The grass was cut. Everything was in place. It was like I was living in a margarine commercial. But then, of course, the universe decided to remind me that peace is a temporary concept, especially when you share space with a woman who treats the neighborhood as if it were The Sims, and she were the only player. She was the kind of person who believes that every square inch of the neighborhood should reflect the aesthetic vision of the community. Whatever that means, a woman who speaks on behalf of the neighborhood association as if she had been anointed with the holy oil of authority, and thinks that clearing a path through someone else's fence is an act of urban benevolence. I come back from the market and find a hole in my fence. A hole. It wasn't a discreet hole. No, it was practically a crater, with boards thrown in any way and footprints in the earth, as if a mini festival had taken place there. For a moment, I thought someone had escaped from jail. But no, it was her. She appears out of nowhere wearing a recycled cotton t-shirt and a smile as fake as her false eyelashes. She says she decided to remove the fence because it was in the way of a community revitalization project. Apparently, my fence was an obstacle to the new walking trail she had invented in the PowerPoint of the HOA meeting that only she attended. And before I could ask where in the Constitution it was written that a neighbor can demolish someone else's property, she was already there, putting up signposts as if my lawn were a public area. Now, you think that was the pinnacle? Little did I know that karma has a refined sense of humor. The next afternoon, I'm on the balcony having a juice, and I see the woman shouting her dog's name like she's on a desperate pet reality show. Mr. Pickles, a poodle who didn't want to be there, is gone. He disappeared beautifully. Because when you cut a hole in a fence that leads straight to a bush track that goes who knows where, guess what? The dog sees it as the gate to paradise. She ran, shouted, handed out leaflets with the dog's picture, and promised a reward. Only this, you could see in her face that it wasn't just about the dog. It was the embarrassment. The feeling that the control she thought she had evaporated in a bark. Because, let's face it, the animal ran off along the community trail that she herself had opened with such pride. And that's when the soap opera began. For 3 weeks, she practically became a mythological figure in the neighborhood. Every day someone would say, "I saw a poodle on the corner," or "I think it was near the lake." Nothing confirmed. A canine mystery involving the bossiest woman in the neighborhood and a dog who decided to drop everything and live as a nomad. Meanwhile, me? I had my fence all messed up, a hole in my pocket because, of course, no one from the HOA wanted to take direct responsibility for what happened. And the woman? She pretended that everything was under control, as if it was normal to lose a dog because she decided to become a civil engineer with other people's fences. A lesson in denial with a specialization in cynicism. The woman disappeared for a couple of days after the dog went missing. And when I say disappeared, I mean completely disappeared from the map. No shouting in the street. No squeaking eco-sandals on the sidewalk. None of the flyers stuck to the lampposts with biodegradable eco-tape. It looked as if she too had wandered off down a trail and disappeared after her dog. And for a second, I almost felt a trace of empathy. Almost. Because it only took the weekend for my balcony to become, without authorization, an impromptu canine search and rescue committee. Yes, you got that right. She brought people. People I've never seen before in my life. About 5 or 6 adults, all wearing t-shirts with phrases like, "Respect animals," and "The land is not ours, we're just passing through." All very nice, but they were all trampling on my plants without the slightest ceremony. Apparently, my house, my backyard, and the hole still open in the fence became the rescue's base of operations. There was even a water tent for volunteers and a crude hand-drawn map showing where the dog was supposed to be. Nobody asked if I wanted it. Nobody cared that it was my yard and that I was trying to rebuild the fence on my own, because not a soul from the association had offered to cover even half of the wood. But the most absurd thing? The woman even set up a small tent with a folding table and a clipboard. Pancetta. As if she had started an election campaign. She looked at me as if I were a documentary production assistant and said, "We need to centralize the visual data." I just shook my head, half laughing, half trying to understand at what point in my life I had become an extra in an episode of suburban tragedy and bizarreness. And then the stories began. Every day, she came up with a new hot tip. Someone saw a white dog on the highway. A cyclist claimed to have almost run over a poodle on the state park trails. A child swore to God that the dog was living with a family of raccoons, and each piece of information became a reason for a new expedition. Yes, she organized searches as if she were hunting Bigfoot, people with binoculars, whistles, and vegan snacks to attract the animal. Once, they even took a box of tofu and tried to lure the dog with it. Tofu. Meanwhile, I watched from afar, like those gentlemen in the rocking chair with the "I told you so" face. The fence was still blown up, the dog was still missing, and she was still in a kind of trance. She seemed to be living through a great existential drama, starring a dog that probably just wanted to chase a squirrel in peace. One day, I was coming home from work, tired, and I saw the woman lying on the grass in her yard, eyes closed, headphones on. I thought she was meditating, but no. She was listening to a playlist of dog sounds to see if Mr. Pickles' pack instinct would bring him home. And I keep asking myself, what happened to common sense? At what point did reality give way to this emotional theater of people who think everything revolves around their desires? And yes, she kept pretending that the destroyed fence wasn't her problem. When I mentioned for the fourth time that I needed a solution, she said something like, "Well, maybe this is a call from the universe for you to be more open to the collective." I swear that inside, my soul packed up and threatened to move house. The level of delirium was such that I didn't know if she was pretending or if she really believed the nonsense she was saying. But the most unbelievable thing was yet to come. 3 weeks after the dog disappeared, I received a call from an unknown number. It was a farmer. Yes, you read that right. A farmer from a rural estate almost 10 kilometers away. He said he'd found a poodle, very well fed, by the way, trapped inside a chicken coop. The animal was there, living peacefully with the chickens, eating poultry feed and sunbathing. According to the farmer, the dog appeared there one night, jumped over a fence, and simply stayed. And he only found out there was a lost dog because his daughter found a crumpled flyer on the sidewalk of the town market. So you can imagine the scene. Me, with a cynical smile on my face, knocking on the woman's door to tell her that Mr. Pickles had been found. She opened the door with that "I'm in the middle of an important call with the UN" look on her face, and I said, "Guess who decided to become a barnyard rooster?" She widened her eyes, then tried to laugh as if she was relieved, but you could see that her ego was as dented as my fence door. And then, as if it were the most normal thing in the world, she let loose. Maybe he was trying to reconnect with his ancestral instincts for freedom. Guys, if I hadn't heard that with my own ears, I would never have believed it. After the dog was recovered in his spiritual retreat inside a chicken coop, I thought, in my holy naivety, that this bizarre chapter in my life was finally closed. My mistake, because that woman was not the type to accept losing, not even when the only thing at stake was her own sense of the ridiculous. It was as if the universe had slapped her in the face, and instead of absorbing the lesson, she looked in the mirror and said, "That was a cosmic caress. I'm more enlightened now." The dog came home acting like he had outlived us all. He walked slowly, looked around suspiciously, and you could see in his eyes, I've seen things you wouldn't understand. And even with all this obvious spiritual transformation of the animal, the woman still wanted to turn the disgrace of my fence into an alternative passage community project. She started referring to that hole in the fence as the new natural access between sister properties. And what's more, she sent an email to the whole neighborhood talking about the benefits of connectivity between backyards, as if this were a condominium in the middle of the Amazon rainforest and not a suburban neighborhood with a traffic circle and a standardized mailbox. According to her, the connection between plots of land encouraged conscious circulation and promoted spontaneous solidarity. I replied with a simple, "I just want my fence back." But then the good part began. She responded by saying that the fence represented an ideological barrier between the self and the other, that by rebuilding it, I would be reaffirming a worldview based on separation and fear. And that's when I realized that I was dealing with someone who didn't live on the same plane of reality as the rest of us. While I just wanted to stop raccoons from turning my grill into a five-star hotel, she saw every plank of wood as a political statement. Meanwhile, the HOA, which technically should have some responsibility in this whole thing, decided, as usual, not to get involved. The excuse this time was that the fence was a matter between neighbors. I thought it was funny, because if I planted a sunflower 5 centimeters outside the line of the flower bed, they'd show up with a laser meter and a book of fines. But destroying someone else's fence and turning their yard into a nature trail depot apparently wasn't their problem. So I started to rebuild the fence myself, wood by wood, hammer in hand, sweat dripping, and every time I put up a new board, there it was, standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, looking as if I was committing an environmental crime. She even took photos of me nailing the fence. She said it might be necessary to document the process for the sake of transparency. One day, she stopped me on the sidewalk and said, with the cleanest face in the world, "Did you know that fences create microclimates that are harmful to the natural balance of the neighborhood?" And I could only reply with a, "You urgently need a vacation in a place without Wi-Fi and organic paint." Look, the pinnacle was when she called an informal meeting with a few neighbors, which in practice meant half a dozen bored souls who didn't have the courage to say no to her, to discuss viable alternatives to rebuilding the structural barrier. That's right, she called my fence a structural barrier. There was even a PowerPoint presentation set up on her laptop with graphs, quotes from philosophers who have probably turned over in their graves, and an image of a bridge in bloom as a metaphor for what she thought my fence prevented: the fluidity of humanity. I watched in silence, sitting on a plastic chair, holding a glass of juice that was clearly sweetened with agave. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, watching, letting her finish the performance. Because sometimes, silence is the only possible reaction to the level of madness masquerading as idealism. When it was all over, I stood up, thanked her for the performance, and said, "Tomorrow I'll finish the fence," with a gate, locked, and I left. The next day, she planted a tree exactly where the hole in the fence had been, a fragile sapling, planted in the clay, as if it were an offering of peace. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or call a priest to bless the ground. The only certainty was that the tree was going to become firewood sooner or later. The tree stayed there for exactly 2 days. 2 days, because on the third, it rained like a biblical punishment. And that sapling, which had been planted with all the faith in the world and no basic knowledge of gardening, fell like a dignified condominium meeting. I saw it through the window, hot coffee in hand, and I swear that for a moment I felt avenged by greater forces. I didn't even need to talk. The universe was already doing what it had to. But of course, she didn't leave it at that. She showed up the next day with a shovel, 2 stakes, and a bucket of organic fertilizer that was more like a biological bomb. She replanted the tree, put little signs around it with phrases like, to flourish is to resist, and nature heals. And then, as if that wasn't pathetic enough, he installed a small decorative white plastic fence around the tree. Yes, a fence. After weeks of saying that fences divide and impede the flow of life, she put a mini fence around her tree. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I got on with life. I finished my fence, installed the gate with a padlock worthy of a federal prison, and regained some peace in the yard. By some miracle or cosmic fatigue, she disappeared for a few days. Perhaps she realized that she wasn't going to be able to turn my property into a spiritual passageway between worlds. But when she reappeared, she came with a different vibe. Too smiley, too sweet. The kind of sweetness that comes with expired sweetener and ulterior motives. She even offered me a compost bin. He said it would help balance the Earth's energy now that you've erected a blockade. I refused with all the politeness I could muster. Not for lack of interest in sustainability, but because I knew that bucket of banana peel and leftover beet was just another bait in her never-ending theater. But then came the final blow. She filed a formal request with the HOA to turn the trail she herself invented, the one that crossed my land, remember, into a path of common use between neighbors with a therapeutic purpose. She used that term. She gathered half a dozen unsuspecting neighbors, promised meditation benches and solar lighting, and tried to make the proposal a priority at the association's next meeting. And I, once again, was caught in the middle of the collective outburst. I was forced to show up at the meeting, that festival of people with more free time than sense, everyone with their organic coffee and printed spreadsheets. And there she was, with slides, sketches, a model made from popsicle sticks, and a ready-made sentence. Our neighbor's yard could be the gateway to a new era of harmonious coexistence. I stood up, took a deep breath, and said something that I still regret to this day. I said that if anyone took another unauthorized step on my land, I was going to install an electric fence and 2 gargoyle statues, and that if they insisted on this therapeutic trail idea, I would consider turning my backyard into a paintball field, just to keep the community atmosphere vibrant. The reaction was mixed. There were those who laughed. There were those who were offended. There was an elderly man who called me a garden tyrant. But the point is that the proposal was withdrawn. And for the first time in months, I was able to sleep peacefully, knowing that the boundary between my house and someone else's delirium was physically protected. After that, the woman still tried to make subtle advances. A little letter here, an ironic comment there, but over time, even she seemed to tire of it. Or perhaps she found another neighbor with even more vulnerable ground and less resistance. The dog, by the way, seemed to be the only one to come out of this well. It never ran away again, never barked more than necessary. He just sat there, staring at the horizon with that look of someone who knows more than he can count. Perhaps he was the only rational being in this whole soap opera. Well, today I have a firm fence, a gate that locks, and a mild trauma from neighborhood meetings. But I also have a story so absurd that nobody believes me when I tell it, which is great because it gives me the chance to repeat it with a little more exaggeration each time. Answer me this honestly. If it were in your backyard, would you have planted another tree or planted a trap? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to leave a like.